Het land dat zorgt voor iedereen. Geen hond die van een goed weet. Met nasiwallen in de muur en niemand die droog brood eet. 15 miljoen mensen op dat hele kleine stukje aarde. Die schrijf je niet de wetten voor, die laat je in hun waarde. It was a hymn to resilience, to the Dutch belief that even in this crowded land, which is constrained by dikes and seas, there was a space for everyone. Every hope, every voice, and every dream. Today, nearly 18 million people prepare for the vote next week, and this lyrics still echoes. But the questions are getting louder. What do we aspire to be? What kind of country we want to have and leave behind, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that will inherit. Now, this reminds me of an iconic slogan of a luxury watch brand. And it says, you actually never own it. You merely look after it for the next generation. So aptly put. This applies to the policy as well as governance. It's a trust, not a possession. We don't own a nation. We merely steward it, its values, its culture, its institutions, so that our children can inherit a society that they can flourish in. John Rawls, the 20th century political philosopher, he has asked us to imagine, design a society behind the veil of ignorance. And behind this veil, we don't know about our positions and privileges in terms of our gender, our religion, socioeconomic status. Whatever policies we make behind this veil is going to affect everyone equally, evenly, including the policymaker. That means it's bound to have a fair and justice in it. But here's the problem. The fairness cannot exist in limbo, in vacuum. As Abraham Maslow, in his need hierarchy model, he reminds us that before we attain the highest version, the self-actualization, we have to take care of our basic needs: safety, stability, livelihood, home, trust, and belongingness. Amidst rising cost of living and growing inequality, internal polarization, external security concerns, the question that we are asking is, how can we secure those foundations again so that our dreams can come true and our hopes can stand on a solid ground? Today, standing at another crossroad between passion and pragmatism, continuity and change, let's remind ourselves of the essence of that old song, that every citizen, all 15 million, now 18 million, they carry a part of this country's promise. The question is not who will govern in the coming elections, but how will we care for each other and for those yet to come. Damas and Hiran, this is Sanjay Sharma, your host, and you have just started watching your favorite program, Expertarians. Today, our election special consists of 3 segments. First part, we bring you leading voices from politics, journalism, and business to unfold the Dutch elections 2025. In the second part, it's a brief social media report, 1.6 million unheard voices by Martin Simonrud, exploring a critical issue, that is political participation of foreign residents and integration. And in the third, the last segment, we bring you a conversation with 3 business personalities to unpack the political choices and economic repercussions. Let's get started. Dutch election 2025. To discuss, we have with us Robin Pascoe. She's a founder and editor, Dutch News. I'm sure that many of you have already browsed the site quite regularly. Joining us is Prachee van Brandenburg. She's CEO, Avion, and former D66 candidate for Senate and party leader, Council Leiderdorp. And last but not the least, we have Milad Mohammadi. He's an ICT consultant and a startup foundation. Welcome you all to the show. in this environment of politics, everybody is talking about what policies would be, what politicians are thinking, but I would like to take a little bit different take on what's going on in the minds of voters. This is the second election within 2 years. If you look at early 80s, over 40% people knew whom to vote, and that percentage has gone down now at 17%. Which is quite a significant change. If you see that they considered earlier only 2 parties to choose from, now the number is more than 3 parties, 3.3 to be precise. I think what comes to my mind is the comparison between Luber's third cabinet, when he had only 2 parties, CDA and PVDA. They could garner 103 seats out of 150. And the last government, which was Rutte's third cabinet, they had 4 parties and acquiring only 76 seats. So my question, I can come to you, Prachee, first. What is going on in the minds of voters?
Well, I think the times also have changed, first and foremost, worldwide. I mean, it's not just the Netherlands, but you see a generation that's you see the Netherlands comes from a history of when, if you go back even further, 60s and 70s, 60s was a verzuiling, as they call it. So there was very limited. You only, you voted for the group you belonged to. In the 70s, you had liberalization and flower power, etc. And that's where you see in the 80s the result that you spoke of, where the parties were still limited, but the people started moving from a fast bastion to a more choice. But fast forward to today, we live in a life of globalization, of change, of many more parties. So there's, certain great. Yeah. We don't have the cutoff or the drempel, as they call, that they have in Germany. So, of course, becoming a party is not that difficult in the Netherlands, first and foremost. Secondly, it's a coalition. Mm-hmm. So people also have strategic voting.
Yeah.
And that's what you see has become more and more the norm in maybe the last 3-4 elections. You hear people, common people, where that word strategic didn't exist in their vocabulary, now saying that, look, we're going to strategically think if we should vote for PVV or if we should vote for GroenLinks or if it's D66. And so they are still moving. I mean, the polls were saying that a week before the polls, the people who had said they're at least going to vote, so that's already reduces you down to a certain group, 50% was undecided.
Okay.
And that's a very big phenomenon, which then means that all these steps make a difference. And why? Because the landscape is so diffuse. People feel that you hear a lot on the streets. We don't trust the politicians. We have an issue with the quickness of which it's going. Yeah. We don't understand why A is said and B is delivered or not delivered at all. Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of, besides the general world around them, in their everyday livelihood, for most of us, we do not know. And the more you come to local politics, it becomes easier to grasp because you know that, okay, this is what's happening in my town or a city. But the moment you extrapolate it on a national level, if I vote for you, what does that actually mean? It's a question I often got. What do I get in return? What do I get back? And that answer has become diffuse, where the other ones were consistent. If you voted for CDA in your 80s time, you knew what it is that you would get. Today, if you vote for the same or other party, you don't know because of the coalition and the breakup and what would be the outcome of the program that they would do. And it's also the system. It's very different than a lot of other parts of the world.
What's your observation, Robin?
I think to me one of the problems is the fact that people are perhaps a bit more, it's all about me. I think politicians are to a large extent. If you look at Parliament, if there's a dispute, they leave the party, they keep their seat. One of the reasons we have 17 or 19 parties in Parliament now is so many people have left the party they were elected for. And perhaps that's one thing that we should be looking at changing and saying if you actually decide you can't be part of the CDA anymore, then you have to leave. And you have to give up your seat. And then we would have less of these little parties that then have 1 or 2 seats in Parliament, and then they're allowed to take part in all the debates, and they're still there, and they're taken seriously, and they're not seriously. I mean, they get 1% of the vote, and I think you're so right. We need a drempel. We need to say you need to have a certain number of seats in Parliament to be able to represent people, and to represent people, not just be there for your own ego. And I think there's a lot of ego tripping.
Yeah, Milad, actually, it was just 2-3 days ago that I heard somewhere, probably in the news, that people are asking ChatGPT for suggestions. What's happening? Turning to machines?
Yeah, I think there's a huge change in how politics is communicated to people. Prior in the decades, it was through traditional media, and now you had social media really change the way people are perceiving politics. And now with AI, people are really using that as a filter for how they understand issues. So definitely that's it's going to be a big change as more and more people use AI to evaluate politics.
But as we are a little bit, tend to be suspicious about the logics, the accuracies of these machines, do you think it's a good idea to actually rely on it?
I think it could be a useful tool to summarize certain issues that have very complex, for example, bills being in the parliament that people might not have the time to read all of it. Mm-hmm. But definitely it's good for people to also have a way to check these because AIs, of course, can always hallucinate and produce inaccurate results. And that's scary in the context of elections. So, yeah.
Since you have the website and you put things in print, what difference do you see in consulting the ChatGPT and going for the print
Well, I
media?
think the first thing to say is that the Dutch Privacy Authority has said don't use ChatGPT to try and get your political views or find out, because it's wrong and it will steer you to one side or the other very dramatically. So I don't think it's a good idea. But I think we asked our readers in a survey what they thought the big issues were, and they came up with the top 5, and we're now we've published 4, 1 to go, of the big issues. So we've gone through all the manifestos for the biggest parties. We don't use the little ones. And I'm looking at a manifesto of 150 pages. Mm-hmm. I mean, come on, nobody's going to go through 150 pages to find out. It's very difficult to get beyond the waffle, and it's a lot of waffle. Every single manifesto on health talked about we want to focus on prevention, we want to give it back to the people, we want small-scale care. They all said the same thing. But when you actually want to look for what are they actually saying, you find buried at the bottom, a sugar tax, a tax on e-cigarettes, practical things that will actually affect people, but they're buried. So I think it actually is a call to politicians to actually try and get their message across a lot more simply and a lot more, let's use bullet points. We all use bullet points these days. Let's use them. I mean, if you listen to the debates, and I don't know if, you've been listening to the debates and haven't gone to sleep half the time, but, they don't talk about actual plans. It's just talking about each other and what they've done and in general terms. So I'd like to see a lot more focus on actually what you mean.
Precisely. Prachee, to you once again. You just mentioned about the trust factor in the minds of people. But before that, given the background of all these parliamentarians, they have probably better off in terms of education and socioeconomic status. My question to you is: do you think that the ordinary citizens do connect with them, or the politicians tend to understand the concerns of the ordinary people? Is it happening? Or
well, I think it's and just to point out what Robin just said, to link into that, right? But on a day-to-day basis, the Netherlands population has also gotten more educated. So you could argue that as over the years the education level has risen, obviously the representatives in the parliament are more educated, and there's a more correlation there. Having said that, I always felt that if you don't get on the street and you don't talk to people ordinarily every single day, the longer you are in politics, let me put it in a different form, the more chances that your disconnect would grow, simply because if you're only rushing from debate to debate. And so there's extra work that needs to be done. And you see the better politicians actually take out the time to actually do that. But there's a lot of just repeating your message as well. And that becomes very tiring, because like you said, with the manifestos, I remember the first thing I did when I came in, and I said, I've got this big document, and how do I sell this to anybody? Nobody understands what's in it. So give me the one A4. Let's make the A4 the rest of the document. There is another reason for that document, though, I'll say. When you get in coalition politics, at the time when I set the A4, it was good for the campaign. But when it came down to actually negotiating, I suddenly realized this long document was very useful, because I could just lift points out and paste them in to do the actual coalition work. So they serve more than one purpose. And from the perspective of the voter, they don't. And if you look, today's message on AI was on the Dutch news this morning, was that AI was biased periodly to my party, D66, and GroenLinks PvdA. And why? If you go back down, these are the two parties that have got their algorithms sorted. They have better Google searches organized. And so, therefore, even when they try to explain the right-wing parties, they benched off these websites to like sort of correlate. So they said, well, this is what's happening. So, but having said that, before AI came along, we had kieswijzer.
Okay, yeah.
So in Holland, we always had this system of looking at other people because we know that most people don't read those topics, so you could fill them in. And I've had the situation where I myself came out on a right-wing turnout on a kieswijzer, and I had just one question that was doubly put in. So even those were never... those days they would say. So you're right. I mean, the trust is based on information, but we have got plethora of information which doesn't allow to discern what it is down to it. But what you do see is that therefore the TV debates become very important.
Yeah.
The meetings door to door, and on the which is not a Dutch phenomenon. In the US, you have canvassing door to door. I think my party, D60, is one of the few parties that literally still do that from a US model. But a lot just go in big squares and big areas because they see themselves as Jehovah's Witnesses if they go to door. So they don't feel comfortable doing the American way of campaigning.
Milad, do you have some observation on this, the connect or disconnect between the parliamentarians' status and the ordinary people?
Yeah, I would say, especially as an expat here, I think there's a lot of unawareness about what's going on in terms of the policies and how they impact us as a outsider here. And compared to the States, I think there's a lot more convergence of the information for people who are immigrants or expats in the U.S. that helps them understand how these politics impact them. But here, of course, thanks to Robin and Dutch News, it is more clarity. But definitely, that's somewhere as an expat, it's hard to see.
Okay. I think it's I want to say it's a very important point that he just raised, because we tried before this election to get somebody from all the big parties to talk to us. One party responded. Most of them didn't bother to respond, even though we used our personal contacts. I heard via one said, oh, expats can't vote, so I don't need to talk to them. I mean, the CBS had statistics out this week that showed 9% of the voting population cannot vote because they're not Dutch. But these are taxpayers. These are people who should be voting. And if they can't vote, politicians should be listening to them. And they should be dispelling some of the myths. You know, how many headlines have we seen? Expats are taking all the houses. We know it's not true, but politicians keep on saying it. And it would be very nice if some of them would actually come out and say, it's not true, let's take a back step, and let's not accept the sort of narrative of the anti-foreigner or the anti-migrant, arbeidsmigrant, refugee migrant, kennismigrant, education migrant. Everybody's a migrant now, and there's a sort of everybody's lumped in a same kind of bowl, and nobody's actually debunking the myths. And that would be very nice if politicians would actually come and talk to the people who can't vote but who pay taxes and that they represent.
It's an interesting point, because in the second segment we have a small documentary which captures the similar sentiments. I would like to come to this trust factor, because this is to me a kind of mind-boggling. I was going through this Netherlands Institute of Social Research survey, and it said 59% of respondents said that Netherlands is going in a wrong direction. That's their observation, and the politics is not offering any solutions. 60% respondents said that politics, they consider it as failed for a simple reason that there is an internal political rift going on, and this non-decision making is taken over. They compare it with 2021. It is kind of like sliding the trust, and they also believe that the big parties are unable to set aside their differences and focus on important points. How do you read these observations, Prachee, if I can ask you first?
Well, I think the observations are true to some extent. They always are. I mean, there is not... at the same time, they're also very, as observations are, they're generic. And the moment you start putting them into, trying to take off the first layer and then the varnish, and then you try to move your way down, you'll notice that yes, it is, but no, it isn't. The last government that we've had now is not typical of the ones that were there all the years before, right? This is a very interesting caretaker prime minister version, which we hadn't seen in centuries, I mean, basically. And therefore, the unfortunate situation being that each party kept him with gunpoint, leading to a coalition. So I think, and the last experience hasn't been, I think, good for anybody, neither the parties, nor the individuals, nor the citizens, because things weren't done. The thing is, everybody would like to see progress in some form. And if it's stagnant and it doesn't move and it's like a ball you kick around and you never ever get down to playing the actual game, then it becomes very difficult. And I think that's really what captures in those points that you've said. I think each of those points does capture that sentiment.
That's right. So if this is the case, do you have any observation, Milad, on that?
Yeah, I would say, from a bit of an outsider perspective, I find the trust in the Dutch state a lot higher for me, given that I think in some other countries there's a lot of partisan politics that creates a very low trust in the government. But here, I feel, given that there's at least a coalition most of the time, I feel that there's more balance in the way the government is run. But of course, there's a lot of issues like the housing issue that aren't being addressed adequately right now, and that's, I think, a big factor for voters. Yeah.
And you, Robin?
Yeah, I think it goes up and down. I comparing 2021 when it was Corona with now is perhaps a difficult comparison to make. I mean, as I understand it, has been worse in the past. It got better. It's been worse. I don't know how much you can put in these statistics, to be honest. I mean, they are, as you say, very much a question of that moment in time. And I think people have quite a lot of trust in the system. They might not have trust in the politicians themselves, but in the system. I don't hear great calls for abolishing the Senate or completely reforming the House of Parliament.
Well, democratically speaking, you do see a lot of maybe the amount of discussions on the state of the democracy have increased.
Yeah.
If you compare to what we had in the past.
Sure.
So, yes, it's there, and that comes from the big debate, which is, I think, so much broader than the Netherlands. It's Europe, it's the US, it's everywhere, and the rest of the world as well, that the discussion between right-wing parties saying that we can abolish certain things or we can do away with certain rules which give certain freedoms. I think they have put it on the agenda, and therefore the debates ensuing, and that gives a lot of people a discomfort of, what's my vote worth? Or if I vote for X, Y, Z. And there are some parties who really think that would bring those who do work for the far right and the right, and they've got their opinions and they should have them, be able to vote for them. And in that speaking, they think that would bring change. And they're just as disillusioned that in this coalition business, you get a halfway house either and nothing happens. And that's the enticement. But nobody in the Netherlands wants to get rid of the coalition system because that would, I don't think any of us parties would get 76 seats overnight anymore in this historical time. It would be lovely, but I don't think it's going to happen.
But do you think that it would be better without coalition kind of setup?
Well, there's always these arguments about what a coalition is for and what it's not. The problem is the amount of parties that participate in a coalition. I don't think the coalition as such is a problem. But of course, it's always easy if you don't have to work with anybody and you're set. You can determine the law yourself. So yes, from that point of view, yes, it's great. But no, but in practical terms, when they had two parties, even when they went to three, it was always a big adjustment. And now you're seeing that the format is at least four. And with four, it's quite difficult. I mean, 4 different viewpoints coming from different angles, trying to put it together. I've sat through. I have an example in Leiderdorp, which was historically, I didn't think it was possible. But we were 4 parties. And we actually governed and without fights. And I thought, well, this is not possible. And I even had a situation where I never had to look back, which is what coalition politics also is. You look over your shoulder to see who's standing there with a knife. I didn't have that problem at all. And there were 4 different parties. But that was because all the individuals realized that their main goal was governing Leiderdorp properly. And there were people who were all there with that. If anything went wrong, that was something we'd go back to the table and say, well, why are we here? I mean, we have different views, but how do we get to this one goal? And that went very smoothly for 2 years, because we got in the halfway house of that. And it went for 2 years, and it was 4 parties who worked very well. So it's possible. My point is, it's possible.
Yeah.
It's possible, and it has been possible here for many years. But I did the sums, and by the end of this year, we won't have a new government yet. We'll have had the last 5 years. We'll have had 3 years under a caretaker government. 3 years out of the last 5. We talk about Italy and Belgium as being unstable, but I think we take the biscuit at the moment. I really do.
But then again, if you look at trust, things do keep going. The trains run, the planes run. So a lot of people are wondering, what is it?
Do we need a government? Maybe we don't need one at all.
But that trust factor also, we'll just come to on the next point. My question is, maybe Milad, I can ask your detached look at it. If a coalition is a problem, do you think that there is a need for reform of the overall political system, or we can tweak a little bit?
I think in the Netherlands it's more tweaking rather than full reform of this system. I think there is a good balance with the coalition model that the Netherlands has, and it gives ability for smaller parties on more smaller issues, let's say for 50 plus, or the party for animals. There's a bit more variety for these sort of smaller issue parties. So I think it would be more tweaking some of the things that relate to the Senate or to the Tweede Kamer rather than completely changing the whole model. Yeah, that's it.
What do you think about this reform?
Well, personally, we need a kiesdrempel. We need to say you need 5% or 3% of the votes to get into Parliament. And I think we need an element of constituency-based voting, that people actually represent you personally. I mean, I'm British, I would say that, we're very biased, but, they've got that kind of system in America. There is somebody who represents you or your area. We could maybe get rid of the Senate the way it is now and have that as a representative chamber, so that somebody actually has to appear on a debate or send me 153 pages of a manifesto, I would like that. I would like to be able to complain or talk to my MP, which I, did once in my entire life, as I've lived here for 40 years. But that would be mine. I would like constituency based. I think that's something D66 has been a bit keen on, haven't they?
Well,
in a way.
Not in that form, but see, what you see is that, yes, the Drempel is something that we've advocated for a long time, but the reason behind it is also that the dynamics have changed, right? So if you look the abolishing of the Senate is one of those points that has been on the cards, and now we actually use the Senate the most. I mean, I ran for Senate in 2023, so for somebody who's supposedly as a party for abolishing it, then you run it, it seems to be oxymoron at the best, right? But the reason and you saw that the Senate actually has in the last couple of years had a corrective actions, what the Parliament was not doing. So again, there's an argument for and to, depending on which perspective you take. But yes, there needs to be some change, because you do see that one issue topics or the way people can be addressed, like you mentioned, I think just now, about the fact that when you vote, you can not vote for a person, for example. Now, you see, because of the way the world is developed and because everything's become more individual and personalized, there's a very keen need that they say, well, we want to be able to choose our prime minister. Well, a coalition doesn't allow you to do that. You can at best vote for the biggest party, but you still could end up with somebody who's never been ministers in this country. I could not be on any ballot, but I could be called tomorrow and said, well, would you like to be a minister? It's potentially possible, and it's possible in this country. It has the bandwidth is possible. But for your point where you said that people then get elected and then they leave the party, there are systems in place within the parties, but legally speaking, they cannot. And the reason is that there's been a tough balance that they have put in because of this coalition, where they've said, well, what if somebody is very popular and very good in their own area? They would get their own votes. And so their own votes can you subscribe them as being party votes? And if that person then leaves, is that not are they the personal votes rather? And that's a dilemma, because I mean, I know that a lot of my votes came because I was D66, not because I personally carried a constituency of hundreds of people. At the same time, given my expat background and the Indians I have, and I would know there were people that I brought to the party at that point in time. So you could argue part of my vote was, and so if I would have segregated from the party, I could have made that argument. So. For that reason, they've tried to make a balance in the system, but then that's a typical Dutch solution, right? It's a balance, and it has good points and bad points.
But I'm just thinking, when you were talking about it, I had to think of Socrates and Plato, because he gives a very vivid example. If you need to fly a plane, you don't want to actually choose somebody from the craft, but it has to be a pilot. So in that case, if somebody, just individual, can fetch all those votes because of the way he's doing, and he's doing too well, is there something wrong about it? Because that's what ultimately we want, actually. As you said in Leiderdorp, that you've been able to actually have harmony and do things, actually, despite having 4 parties.
No, so exactly what the system tries to balance between the two. So experts and individuals on the one hand, or people with experience, and those who may come because they're popular, political, bring something else to the table. So the system currently does that. If you want to change the system, it would mean that you either make a choice for the one or the other, or you'd make certain tweaks. So the system in itself does work. It's just that in the Netherlands, because of the different blood groups and that the vote gets split so much currently, makes it very difficult. And there is a lot of people are moving. Voters, see, in the old days, you had a base. If you're a CDA member, that's what it is. I mean, you got up and you were born CDA and you probably died CDA. I mean, you were taught it from a family perspective. Today, that's not true. You'll look and you go, do I like Mr. Van Harry Bontebal? Do I like Mr. Ropiette? Or do I like so-and-so? And you might be voting something completely different. Yeah. Maybe not out, if you look at the analysis, people are not out of spectrum. So right-wing right is not going to vote left-wing left. But within that basket of right-wing, you have seen in the last years, we've seen all these parties rise and crash. True to some degree of left-wing as well, if you look at where the vote moves. It moves within a certain spectrum of parties. So people don't, and then in the centrum, and everybody screams that they want the centrum, but they vote on the flanks. So therefore the coalition that's formed is a mix, which means the mix of ideas have to then be done by politicians, and you leave them the room to make whatever recipe they make of every single thing that they do.
So if we think about some kind of changes or adjustments, is there any system out there in other countries maybe which could be actually a better form, or that is where the change could take place?
Well, like I said, D66 is from old date is a rebellious party. So they came in with saying that we want certain ground rules. So they said we want an elected mayor, which they'd seen in the US. They'd seen, said they'd done their homework abroad, and they didn't want the Senate because it was too elitist. And as that party became more mainstream, they realized that the ability to abolish those, they've not parked or gotten rid of those points, but their attempts to make those changes were not met very well by the rest of the party, so they weren't able to make those changes. And so what you see is that it's still on the wish list, but it's not the only point that they've driven at. And they've seen that people really care more than systematic change. They really want change in their everyday livelihoods. People want healthcare just to be good. You want your kid to have a good education. You want to be able to travel. You want, the reality is that. I mean, you can change the system all you like. There will always be pros and cons.
Yeah. No, that's true. Robin, you have any remarks on that, if you compare?
I couldn't compare because there's problems in every place, aren't there?
Yeah, exactly.
No perfect political system. We wouldn't have political theory if there was.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think so. I mean, there are tweaks. And the other thing I think to remember is any major change here requires a 2/3 majority.
Yes.
You're never going to get that. So, forget it. Don't waste your time thinking about it, really.
Okay.
Let's just focus, as you say, on the issues that people actually want solving and nothing has happened.
Come to you, Milad, because you just mentioned about this democratic index. You mentioned that it's doing pretty well. This concerns the rule of law issue at the moment, many people think. And I was going through this National Voters Survey 2023, which is called Keezers on the Zoo. Yeah? And it indicated that 36% respondents, they had a preference for a strong leadership, even if they might choose not to follow laws strictly, right? The second is 26% supporters, they were in favor of decisions made in the interest of majority, even at the cost of minorities. So how do you interpret these kind of surveys?
Yeah, I think that is concerning that over and across many countries there is a decline in the rule of law. And I think on this issue regarding strong leaders, I think one way that could be proposed to mitigate this would be the use of referendums on certain issues in order to prevent a very strong leader that could move towards authoritarianism. When there's certain divisive issues, I think proposing a referendum, even if it is advisory, would help to give the voter some sway without having the need for executive overreach. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, referendum is a topic that D666 has at different varies and different versions proposed. However, said that, I mean, forget my party for a second. If I look at, I find the noise that comes from social media does really affect these kind of also surveys, but outcomes. When I ran for Senate, as a woman, you also see a lot of things, but as a foreigner, you see certain things. There's different versions that you see. And one thing that amazed me is that in Leiderdorp, when I used to do my Twittering and whatever, I never really got bothered. The day I ran for Senate and I put out a post, I haven't seen so much 3 days of trolls go back and forth. And I thought it was just because I tagged somebody nationally. So the next time I thought, I'm really smart. So next time I'm not tagging the person again. But it didn't matter. It was just that you're on a national platform and you were a woman. And it was a landscape and it started. And unfortunately, all the good news was also in it. So you did have to read through it to, answer. And Twitter or any of them, it brings a particular, it's a very, and now with TikTok, you just see very limited, we're all living in our bubbles. So the information that you get or the surveys that come out are based on the information we've gleaned. And if the information literally parrots what we want to listen to, how do you then listen to other people's opinions and how do you then come to a point where you can actually bridge them? And you see silos developing. And that's also what politicians, certain types of politicians speak to. And that makes it an echo rather than a conversation.
Yeah, as a follow-up, actually, I would like to introduce here this VDEM report of 2024, and it says that since Second World War, Netherlands was doing, upward mobility as far as liberal democracy index is concerned, but in the last couple of years, just few years, it's going, downwards, and they cite here it's because of the decline of the press freedom, diminishing respect for constitution by politicians. And it also says the CPB and judiciaries are being questioned. We had seen this example of nitrogen. And one thing that caught my attention was the Council of State, the status, the Raad van State. They are functioning since, 1531? And it looks at if the certain laws can be implemented. But they say that they are being ignored and sidelined. But in fact, the legal system says that the council must be consulted by the cabinet on proposed legislation before a law is submitted in the parliament. This trend, which direction are we headed as a society?
Well, I'd love to believe we're ready for a correction, but I don't know if that's true. You see it all over if you take the world view of it, the US being maybe a good example at this point in time, but other parts of the world too, then we may have a little bit to go before we get to that correction. Because in the Netherlands, though it's getting worse, it's not at that level today. So you might see. That's one theory. The other part of it is that I think people are aware that that's not the way you want to go down. So there's, in this particular election, for example, there's a lot of speak that we want to go back to the system. But if that's wishful thinking, or the voters will deliver that possibility, that will remain to be seen on Wednesday, right? So if they all vote a huge PVV vote, and you get a situation where the rest of the parties rule them out, and they create a centre, you're going to have a very big constituency of your voters who is going to be disillusioned, and they will continue to speak, troll, do whatever it is because they don't feel represented. If you put them in politics, which is what they tried to do in the last government, it didn't help because that also remained an echo chamber. They didn't come with solutions to the problem. They didn't want to bridge gaps. They didn't want to, bring a solution to the table. So the average voter has a limited control over what happens after their votes been cast.
Yeah.
And that's true in every part of the world.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the level of your politicians. And so if you look at expatriates, for example, which I think a really good case in point that we're not heard from that perspective, what you see is that what we don't see very often is that Dutch expats are trying to do the same thing and trying to get influence from abroad. And they recently did a survey, and they said if Dutch expats would all vote, and there's a very limited who managed to do it, and that's an archaic system that needs to be changed first and foremost. But if they were able to vote, they would be looking at an influence of nearly 10 to 12 seats. That's a huge impact. And their views are very much aligned with the expatriate views who are sitting in the Netherlands. They would like their passport discussion within 5 years and not 10 years. They would like, and my party is one of the few, there are a few others, who really look at that expat angle because they have a lot of people who've been expatriates, always argue. Sure. So they understand that dilemma, and therefore they try to bring those topics. But then if you're sitting in a coalition and you're the only party left, you're outruled, you can bring those talks to the worst. But the most important is to be able to table them. And how do we have influence? And what you do see as expatriates, I realize when I did my Senate vote, I have a system. We understand hometown. We know how the US works. We know how India works. We know how Britain works. But we don't understand the system. It's too complex. Even if you explain it to me, like the D66 is one of the few who has an English manifesto. You can actually read the English version of their manifesto. It's a bit long, I grant it, but it's there. But it's shorter these days but even that, people don't have the time and don't want to take the energy, and it takes understanding. So what I did is, when I went for Senate, I went to people and said, you know what, you don't want to take the time? Do me one favor. Just put in a blank vote. Because a blank vote, which is something nobody will understand in any other part of the world, because it's not normal a blank vote in the Netherlands has influence. So as an expatriate, if you don't have time to do anything else, just go in the thing and say, I don't know who I'm voting for. And you would have influence. And what you would do is you would actually create less of a percentage for, let's say, right wing. I'm not saying, or any extremist. You actually bring it to the centrum, which in my view is typically good for expatriate populations because they tend to sit on the right to the centrum typically, or centrum in many of them.
Not in our readers' surveys.
Oh, that's interesting.
No, so. And in the survey we just did, and the ones we do every election, we would actually, our Dutch news readers would produce a two-party coalition. And our Prime Minister, if they had their way this time, would be Frans Timmermans. And they're a Green Left and a D66 voting. I mean, that's the ones that vote for us. VVD is third or fourth. CDA, nobody votes for them. So I'm sorry, Mr. Bontebal, you're not big under the international community. But
and he's one of the guys everybody liked.
Exactly.
Apparently, so
maybe our readers are not typical.
So. Milad, do you read this survey? What is your take on it?
Yeah, I think given the survey, I do feel most of the expats are definitely within on the centrum. I don't know if it would be center left. I think it depends on which expat population you're talking about, like EU versus non-EU, and people who are which industries they work in. I think that has a huge impact on how they would be if they were to theoretically vote, how they would vote. And on the issue, I think of the Raad van State, I think another thing besides the referendums that I think is a way that you could alleviate the issues of the voters is to put more of the control also within the provinces. Even though the Netherlands is not a federal state, I think having more, for example, there's issues about housing, for example, that are outside of the Randstad, for example, Groningen or Flevoland, other provinces, maybe you could have a lot of the voting take place and a lot of these issues be decided on a provincial level. That would give voters more of a say without having to go through the whole national apparatus. Yeah.
Well, typically, the result actually is that a lot of parties are saying, abolish the provincials. You'd then have only 2 tiers. And the reason they're saying it is because of these layers and so many coalitions and so many, for the size of the country, let's face it, we're talking about only 18 million people. In Netherlands, that sounds like a very big number. But if you look at it in other parts of the world, 18 million people is not so many people. So for a size of that much, to have 3 layers, and provinces have a historical reason, and they have a Senate reason. But a lot of people are saying that if you take out the provinces, you would actually create a closer interface between the two and a quicker trickle down of money, and you'd save. So there's two sides of that debate, I think.
You forgot the fourth layer, the very important one that everybody can vote for. Yeah, the water boards. I mean, it's amazing. So many people do vote for the water boards. We've actually had water boards come to Dutch News and say, write about us because your readers can vote for us. It's, people get excited at voting for the water boards.
And they're the oldest layer of government.
Exactly, exactly.
So,
about this Raad van State, I think recently one of the politicians said the council should be selected by the parliament. So I'm questioning this raison d'etre. Is it desirable, or would it even serve the purpose of this council?
Well, I think they'll be fighting a long time before they decide who's going to sit on the council in current situation. I think that would be unfortunate. The council itself has a certain elitist bend, and it has a technical bend. So the question is, if it has a technical bend because it's there because there are certain lawyers or certain people who know about climate, or certain people, how do you then, within the context of those, you could limit and say, well, within them there should be, but you'd also have party politics entering. And the whole point of the council was always to have a clear expert understanding of something which is non-political. And advice. They advise, and therefore the politics is done in the cabinet. You would also take away from the discussion from the cabinet. So personally, I don't see why you change it to that level. I know that people in my party have different views on that, but
But is it just an opinion of just one party, one politician, or it is also?
I don't think there's a big discussion about the Raad van State, the Council of State. I mean, it's a government advisory body. All bits of legislation have to go there. They have to have their say. We saw them do their work this time, going no, no, no to all the strictest asylum policy ever proposals. I don't think there's a huge discussion about reforming them and changing them. They're just a sort of bit of apparatus.
Well, the discussion comes actually at a municipal level, because a lot of people are allowed to actually go legally to the court, but also to the Raad van State. And that, if you're talking about getting things done, housing projects typically get delayed because this whole procedure is in place. So if there's any tweaking or changes that they want, is to make sure that the actual work doesn't lie for years, because the procedure allows for steps. But I don't think it's the council itself that they want to get rid of. It's either the timelines or the amount of people that can apply.
It has two roles. One is government advisory. The other is it's the highest administrative court. So that's why council disputes over building permits go there, not through the legal system. And you could get rid of that bit of it quite easily, possibly. But
so it's not altogether, but just a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't think, apart from the planning procedures, which is housing and speeding up housing, and that's very important. Maybe that would speed up housing if we got rid of them. Okay, we'll campaign for it now.
Many more points in my mind I would like to bring, but given the time, I want to talk about some critical issues. We know about the energy and asylum and integration and housing. These are major issues. Are there critical issues that are not being discussed, and they are very important? Can you think of something?
Well, climate change has disappeared off the political agenda. Nobody's talking about it.
Shall I phone call for Mr. Trump?
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's something. That's one of the, I think, perhaps a bigger mess from the outgoing coalition than the whole immigration and border controls discussion is. We've actually kind of given up reporting on it because we've kind of lost the plot completely. There's a new plan, there's a new this, there's a new that, and it's of course the most important thing. This is a country 25% below sea level. We're going to have a big problem when the glaciers melt and the rivers flood and the sea level rises, but we don't talk about it. And it's not an issue this campaign, and it was last campaign. And I'm not really quite sure why that is, but it's just sort of.
Well, I think this campaign has. The concerns that have been there, if you check with voters, because if that's the start where you take your campaign, then housing, health, and basically this immigration issue. These were the three topics that were considered across all parties the most, which then means that if you say that a span in any campaign can be limited to a few topics, you will see that certain topics, so in our party program, you will see enough about climate and sustainability, and people would understand about it. It's only not been put up as the main issue as it was last time around. And also you've got to realize that elections come very soon. So how many times do you repeat the same message? I mean, you think that people have sort of remembered what my message was a year and a half, 2 years ago, and now. So then this iteration of quick cabinets falling, and we back to the ballots, does mean that people also want to understand, well, what are you going to do as of today? And these are what little bit longer term issues, so that things haven't changed so much. The problem is still the same. It still needs to be addressed. So yes, that's been said. And the solutions also are on the table. So what you, and that's a question of what you vote for. I think that's my explanation of why it's not on the forefront.
But some of the people are also saying that instead of focusing too much on the asylum issues, probably we should be thinking about those who are already inside, how to better integrate that. Could that
but the integration discussion has been going on for 30 years plus. Mm-hmm. And what do you define as integration? I mean, does it mean that if I speak my Dutch accentless, am I better integrated? Mm-hmm. What does it mean as an expat? You come in as an expat in any part of the world, and I've done it as a child, I've done it as an expat spouse in other parts of the world. So I've seen in my own design in that, and I've seen the reverse as well of my family, who have been immigrants all over the world, that you come in temporarily, mostly, and then you finally decide to stay longer. So now this whole thing about the passport, which is a huge issue in the expat community. If you say that, so the right wing is saying, well, we have a problem with everybody coming in, so let's make that 10 years plus. What's random? My party says no, they contribute, they pay taxes, they should be able to vote, they should be able to naturalize, they should have the choice to stay. And most of the people that come, 90% plus, I would say, contribute. Mm-hmm. The other part you saw is with the immigration discussion in the Netherlands. For years, a refugee wasn't allowed to work, which is bonkers, basically. So only in the last parliamentary period what my party was in, one of the parliament members, and I've spoken to her various times when I was in council on this topic, I said, please enable us to allow them to work, because it solves half the problem. Financially, their mental health, their ability to be mobile, they might get up and go, leave the country again, because they actually have a job which allows them to be mobile, so you actually might facilitate a right-wing problem. Yeah. But if you lock them up and you intensely, you dehumanize them, basically, in certain words, you're not doing anything good for neither the country nor the thing. But the argument is very siloed on the right-wing side. There is no discussion that there are other solutions. Mm-hmm. And you've got to think further. And I think if I take we as being expats or foreigners who've come back at a certain point, because we're not engaged in that mainstream sufficiently, you don't have people that represent that vote or that conversation. They exist, but they're not really asked to do. Like I remember I ran an expat ballot in Leiderdorp, realizing that I have very little expats in Leiderdorp. They're all sitting in Utrecht and Leiden. So I said, well, that's brilliant. I mean, I know I have them, but I can only do so much for them. And that community I was aware of, I could do stuff in council for them, and they would call. But because they had me, they would actually call. They would actually feel comfortable to say, well, we have a problem with the school. Yeah. And it's not doing, can you do something? But you need to have that. You need representation. And we don't, because it's all Dutch, it's much more easier in the UK. It's more easier in the US. Because language isn't the barrier. Here the language starts being the first barrier before you even make it through the system. So yes, representation will help in that. And I think,
Milad, do you have observations on that?
Yeah, I think for the non-expat community, I would say the business environment here, like how stable it will be for companies to continue to do business in the Netherlands. How will it be in terms of taxation? These sort of issues, I think, are always important. And I didn't see a lot of that in reading a lot of the agreements or the party manifestos. So that's something that I think is a really important factor, and that's what makes the Netherlands one of the top countries in Europe. And then on expats, I think for us, of course, the passport issue, that's a very big sensitivity, because a lot of us have given up a lot to come here, sold our belongings and whatnot and brought our family. So that's something that I think it's the question, is citizenship part of the integration process, or is it the final thing that is integration? And the other, would be also the dual citizenship issue. Like, do we need to completely sever our ties with our former countries? That's another thing that for a lot of us is a really important issue. Yeah.
But then, if I may, there is an organization that's been set up, who's on the table, and they actually, and one of my party members, but it's agnostic, so it's for all the parties. So they've actually influencing Nederlands voor Buitenland, so they've actually stichting, which they're influencing the parliamentarians on both these topics, trying to create this awareness why you need, even as Dutch people living abroad, why you need dual citizenship. If you, so he said, if you don't want to do it for the expats living here, at least you do it for the Dutch people living abroad. It's the same angle. It's still your own people, and who are getting severed, who can't get bank accounts, who have problems with all of these cases, which of course the average Dutch citizen doesn't deal with, has no clue what all that rigmarole is moving from A to B. And of course, it's a smaller group in a total, but it's an essential group, because indeed, doing business, having them come live here, stay here, contribute. Obviously, it has to be smooth, and it's the same with schools. It's the same. So the awareness with some parties are there, but very limited. And like I said, it's the ones that have travelled the most and have got people of different areas in it who can do it. But I think the influence has been limited, because even big companies, when they try to do the expat ruling, you saw what they've done. I mean, it's just even the current parliament on everybody thought the cabinet fell. And we all thought, oh, gleefully, great, nothing is going to happen for a little while on this topic. And what do? In July, they sit down and they say, for youth, we're still raising the prices from January for the expat. So if you want to come into the HSM, if you're youthful, there's a nice smaller slab, which allows you for a lesser cost. And they want to exponentially raise that, which is a right-wing agenda. It's been there for a long time. But it's been pushed through. So it would mean that per January, the government will still set it, despite the fact that the elections are still. So unless the new party just turns it around, it still would come into play. And that would be not good for business.
Wow, there's so much which is going on in my mind, and I really want to discuss about it, but I think time is very limited at the moment. So I would like to have the last question, probably a couple of seconds each. Forget about the politicians and the politics. If you have to advise voters, what is that main important issue that you would say, please consider that when you go for voting? Just for the sake of like the national economy, social fabric, harmony, everything. Who would like to start?
I think I would say you need to go for the party that you think is going to get this country's reputation back up to the level where it was. We saw yesterday NOS had a survey which showed in Europe Holland doesn't really count for very much anymore. We're losing our reputation. We're losing the ability to attract highly skilled people here. I know that the expat centres, they've all saw the number of people coming last year going down 20, 30%, nearly 40% in some places. People aren't coming. They know there are no houses. They know there's a lot of racism. The immigration issue is seized on by the far right. They know that they're going to get shouted at and told to go back to your own country. Because it happens to all of us. It happens to me. You know, I've lived here 40 years. It's ridiculous. I think you need to, I would say, vote for a party that's going to put the Netherlands back in its rightful position as a beacon of, you know, liberal, as good causes, being a decent place to live. That would be my suggestion.
Milad, 30 seconds.
I would echo what Robin said. I think when I would be advising a voter, I would say consider what makes the Netherlands the Netherlands. Okay. I think what the infrastructure, the education quality, the all of the social fabric of this country, it's one of the best, and I think it should continue to be a strong place for both locals and also for expats. So
perfect. And Prachee.
The country is made up of immigrants. If they look at their own local background, they're a bunch of immigrants from whichever century you can look at. So leave the immigrant discussion and concentrate on the issues that are there for our next generations: housing, health, education. Those are the things, and therefore look at the parties, exactly what Robin echoed.
Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect note to end there. I would like to thank you all, and this is not the end of it. I'm sure we would find some more occasions that we get together and continue the conversation. Thanks a lot.